The employee fired from FEMA over claims she told her team to avoid homes with Trump signs.
Marnie Washington, who is that employee who was fired, joins us now from California.
She apparently instructed relief workers going door to door in Florida to skip the homes of Trump supporters.
Accused of telling staff to skip hurricane-ravaged Trump homes, claims it was common practice to do so.
All right, everyone, this one's pretty crazy. Try picturing this. A hurricane has devastated your town and flooded and damaged homes, including your own, and scattered debris everywhere. So you're probably feeling desperate for a little help, and finally, FEMA, which after all was the agency that was created and meant to support in times like this, decides to roll into town. So you might be thinking that some relief might be coming. But then it turns out that they passed by your house, and you don't know why. But then it turns out that the reason they passed by your house was because of that Trump sign or Trump flag in your yard. Now, this might sound too wild to be believed, but as it turns out, it happened, and FEMA is confirming it. This, of course, isn't just some local dispute. It's a scandal that strikes at FEMA's credibility, both in Florida and potentially nationwide. So here's what we're going to do. Today, we're going to be uncovering the case of Marnie Washington, who was a FEMA supervisor accused of telling her team to avoid homes with Trump signs or other indications of Trump support, and then claimed that this was due to a routine policy of FEMA to avoid potentially hostile locations. But if FEMA's decisions are hinging on politics, as former employee Washington indicates, then they'd be betraying every taxpayer counting on fair aid. So I hope you'll stick around for a while as we discuss this story, because it has layers, and it turns all the way from political fallout to the investigations that are now coming down the pipe. All right, so here's what we know so far. This all starts with a woman named Marnie Washington, who was tasked with coordinating disaster relief in Florida, and she told her team to avoid homes with Trump campaign signs. And FEMA has confirmed that part. And FEMA has responded in kind by firing this employee. The FEMA administrator, a woman named Deanne Criswell, has labeled the former employee's actions as reprehensible and says that she worked against FEMA's values. But former employee Washington has not gone quietly into that good night. She's turned it right around and claimed that this political avoidance is a FEMA best practice to avoid potentially hostile situations. So if it turns out that this is more than just one rogue employee, but rather a FEMA doctrine, FEMA might have some fairly serious questions to answer. As you might expect, Washington's claims didn't just raise an eyebrow or two. They have led to a political firestorm, and so far a fairly bipartisan one. The House Oversight Committee, led by Representative James Comer, wants the FEMA administrator to testify, arguing that FEMA should be above politics. And the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, has also launched a statewide investigation, calling this targeted discrimination. Governor DeSantis sees this as more than one employee's misconduct. He's questioning FEMA's impartiality altogether. But someone must have told the employee that if you're explaining, you're losing, because they're not trying to justify anything, rather they're doubling down. In an interview with Roland Martin, the employee, Washington, insists that she followed a FEMA unwritten guideline to avoid political hostility, which apparently in this case, she interpreted to mean anyone who supports Trump.
How long had you been working in this capacity with FEMA?
Since 2019.
Since 2019. So you had worked other disasters around the country.
Correct. And I always exceed the expectation, and I come highly recommended. So this is something that FEMA has learned over the years from responding to natural disasters under the Stafford Act. So from community trends, you start learning when you take these notation from field intel. If a community has the purple rocks or painted trees, they learned over time that you are met with aggression usually, or they do not want you on their property at all.
So if you turned in reports to your supervisors that state political hostility for the people in the field, those reports exist.
Yes, hence why I also sent you screenshots where they're deleting files now from my computer. So FEMA says they fired me, but I still have access to the systems and their applications. And while I was in an interview yesterday, I noticed that my files were being deleted in my name, and I could not have been doing that while I was talking to Madison. So FEMA is very well aware of the incidents that take place, not just with my crew, but with all of the crews in the state that's declared. And instead of just saying, hey, this is how we're going to mitigate it to protect our people, they decided to fire me and make sure Donald Trump knows that they are loyal to him because they fear retribution.
She claims that her team's instructions were about safety, not actually about politics. The employee, Washington, even asserts that similar guidance was used in the Carolinas. That suggests a pattern of sidestepping problematic areas. If true, FEMA's focus might be shifting more towards its own convenience rather than its duty to the public. Meanwhile, as the former employee and FEMA clash, residents in Florida are left to wonder if politics determine their access to aid. Owen Radke, who was a Florida resident, said, in a disaster, politics should be irrelevant because it's un-American. And I couldn't agree more. If it turns out that FEMA really passed by homes over yard signs, particularly only those of one political party, it's a staggering breach of trust. FEMA exists to serve all Americans in need. Washington's alleged political avoidance strikes at the core of this mission. FEMA, for its part, insists that Washington's claims of an unwritten policy are unfounded.
Why is this coming down on me? I am the person that jotted down the notes from my superiors, and my notation in Teams chat was exposed from their surge capacity team. That's exactly what happened, and it's easy to then say, well, haha, it's her name, it's her writing.
Right.
Make her accountable for it. But I'm just simply executing, again, what was coming down from my superiors.
Right.
The FEMA director, Criswell's statement underscores that FEMA serves all Americans without bias and that any deviation is unacceptable. FEMA has pledged an internal review to ensure impartiality, but if Washington's allegations go unexamined, FEMA's credibility might be permanently tarnished. So what's next for FEMA? This scandal has raised questions about FEMA's culture and accountability. The House Oversight Committee's investigation could determine if political avoidance is an isolated issue or a deeper problem. Americans, after all, expect government agencies like FEMA to provide unbiased relief. And if that trust erodes, the entire foundation of disaster relief is at risk. But now let me turn things over to you and ask you, what do you think? Should employee Washington face further consequences, or do you think that this unwritten policy defense might have more truth to it than FEMA is willing to admit? Do you think that this is a rogue act, or do you think that FEMA has a deeper cultural problem that roots in political bias? And what would you do if your house was skipped over in a crisis because of a yard sign? Make sure to share your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think FEMA has its own cleaning up to do, or is this story overblown? Let's dive in, because government accountability matters. And if you want more exposés on bias and abuse of power, make sure to hit subscribe. We've got plenty more in store. Until next time, I've been Uncivil Law. And remember to keep it uncivil out there.